Okay, if you're back, you've made the decision that you still want to stay with corn going forward. So what are some of the potential management considerations you need to make as you face having to plant this crop towards the end of May, 1st of June? First of all, if you're a livestock producer, certainly a dairy producer that relies on corn silage and cob meal, I wouldn't suggest you change very much at all. Stay the course, hang in there. Your corn silage, etc., might be a little bit later coming off. Its energy content may be and potentially a little bit lower than what you've used to, but that's why God made nutritionists. Those guys and gals are pretty good at working through nutrition issues in crops in varying states of nutritional quality, and they serve you folks really well. For the cash cropper, the choices are a little bit different. First and foremost, obviously, in my view, the key things that we have to really key on the key thing is maturity. After that, it's maturity. After that, it's kind of maturity. Everything else starts to fall by the wayside. The secondary characteristic, in my view, is test weight. But once you kind of get into other things, particularly from a disease point of view, I start to think, forget all that. It's not nearly as important because we've got the biggest risk to the crop in terms of having something that we can utilize and market is maturity. And consequently, I mean, even 10 days ago, I started bringing in some hybrids that were a little bit earlier. Through this neighborhood, 3,000, 3,100 units is kind of about the limit from a grain corn point of view. And for the most part, we've already pulled those hybrids back. Seed companies tend to say, well, don't change too much until May 25th. Well, here we are, we're May 20th today, and the 25th is right around the corner, and we're not going to have much progress till the 25th, so we already have to really start to think about switching genetics, moving genetics, bringing the hybrids, the earlier hybrids from north to south. Pioneer's pretty well suited. We've been through this before. They know how to do it. And I have full faith that we do have an organization that can bring hybrids of early maturity south. And if whatever maturity choice that you feel you need to make, we will do our darndest to satisfy that. And I actually have confidence that for the most part we'll be able to handle that challenge. The after maturity, what about test weight, in my view, comes into it a little bit too, because test weight will carry you in a little bit of a reduced growing season. It will maintain grain quality. It will give you potentially corn at the end of the year that's just a little bit more marketable. So I also look at test weight as a partial contributor to hybrid selection. Plant height, interestingly, can be also something that you want to give a little bit of thought to, because as I mentioned in the first session, corn plants will compress themselves in a little bit of in the development process, but conversely, they actually will grow taller usually with late planting dates. And the reason for that is that they go through their vegetative period with temperatures that are generally in June and July hotter, and that heat, in combination with them kind of compressing, but the heat actually makes them stretch, and the internode length between leaves will lengthen a little bit. So consequently, hybrids tend to, when they're planted late, will grow a little taller. So if you've already got a tall hybrid to begin with, potentially that hybrid down the road is going to certainly grow a little taller, and then you get into whether your roots and stalks are strong enough to keep that thing upright in the fall weather. So plant height is also a secondary thing to think about, but primarily, as far as sitting in this chair, it's maturity. Test weight is everything after that gets to be a little bit of window dressing, and then there are some subtle things depending on the hybrid, but we're not going to change too much out of those two characteristics we talked about. What about plant population? Well, it's interesting. Population response, regardless of whether you plant 1st of May or whether you plant the 1st of June, population response actually on average is very, very similar. In other words, if your yield is maxed out in that 32 to 36,000 zone, you really should not change that at all on the 1st of June. The shape of the curve, when you look at population curves, the Pioneer's done this work, when you look at population curves, they really don't change. the yield potential, the curve is lower because we've got lower yield potential, but the shape of the curve is essentially the same. So don't modify or get too hung up in changing plant populations very much. Nitrogen is certainly going to be a question. Well, if I got reduced yield potential, should I cut back on my N? And you could make an argument that if you look at it from that point of view, there is maybe a little bit of sound thinking. Cash flow is going to be reduced, so consequently expenses maybe need to be trimmed, and nitrogen is one thing that you can slice out of the pie. However, I kind of sit on the fence, or I'm part of the fence that says, well, if we're going to plant a crop, we've got a 3-layer crop, and we can't go part way. So consequently, I'm not going to, in my own personal situation, corn that I've yet to plant, I'm not going to really back off on my N rates. I'm going to keep it right where I tend to think it should be and where it would have been planted the 1st of May. Right or wrong, that's just how I look at it. That's my plan going forward. So as far as I'm concerned, corn that I've yet to be planted, well, we're going to possibly, depending on when we get to the field, we might pull back a bit on maturity. We're leaning right now on 2,900 heat unit corn. But if it's 1st of June, we may slice that back a little bit into the 2,800 heat unit bracket. We'll have to see. Population, nitrogen, we're not going to change anything in that regard. We know we'll probably with planting into ideal conditions are decreasing, but we're going to have to do our best to be as patient as possible and before we get too rammy and stick seed in the ground in an unfavorable environment. That's all part of it. So that's our considerations for now. If we think of something else and come up with something that's different, we'll be certainly back in expanding those ideas to you. So consequently, we sure hope you have a great week. We're looking forward to something that's a little bit better, but in the meantime, keep smiling and everything will work out. It always does. Thank you.